I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read in
And
the
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
I
invited...
remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah.
I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Many are stifling their own free speech out of fear of being canceled. Trigger warnings have become more necessary these days for those who live in fear of hearing, reading, or being otherwise coming into contact with an idea which may expose them to a potentially uncomfortable or even challenging thought. This is that trigger warning. I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. This includes being theologically conservative. I want to know and believe what is true, and I'm willing to challenge my beliefs. So if you're easily offended, this is clearly not a safe space for you. Are they sufficiently warned, Ron?
I don't know, Don. I think you might want to go over that once more.
Today is May 18, 2021, and this is broadcast number 240. Today, our friend and soon-to-be double doctorate, Irina House, joins us to talk about totalitarianism and the faith, growing up in the Soviet Union. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., which produces the unknown webcast, or the underknown webcast, or the nearly known webcast, and I'm in Wonder Lake, Illinois. And our senior researcher is Ron Henzel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
You know, I flew in from Miami on the BOAC, couldn't get to bed last night. Remember that song, Back in the USSR?
Oh, yeah,
we going back
in
there?
the USSR.
Did you ever hear
that? You don't know how lucky you are, boys.
Back in the US, back in the US, back. You don't remember that song. It's the Beatles. Okay. Greetings from Sunny. Irina has a lot to learn about American culture. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the sun came out. It's shadow now. We have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast, somebody's heard of us at least. It's the Grievance Industrial Complex, because things are never bad enough already. The Grievance Industrial Complex. And now our new legal disclaimer. Our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be Irina House, soon to be double doctor. She's doubling down on doctorates. Irina House has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the Webcast, although we will probably not mention it again. The satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. bears no responsibility, liability for, or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. This straight from our lawyers at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Notice the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too if you like it, or even if you don't and you want to just annoy somebody else with it. To ensure your continued access, or anyone else's, to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click on the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. So back in the 1960s, there was a song by the Beatles called Back in the USSR. It was done in a kind of Beach Boys kind of rock style, and it was sung from the point of view of a Russian who was going back home, leaving the West, because he's leaving the West behind because it's really terrible, but it's really nice in the USSR. The Ukraine girls really knocked him out. They leave the West behind. Moscow girls make him sing and shout. So anyways, that was a song. It was really popular. maybe.
And that was prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Oh, way before,
prior to the breakup of the Soviet
It was the
Union.
1960s, for crying out loud. So, greetings, Irina. We're here to talk.
Okay, howdy there. You didn't see that one coming, did you? Yes, I remember the song very well.
Oh, you do? Okay.
And now that you summed it up, I think we can be done, because that's what we're doing right now. It's the song.
You really didn't want to talk about the song.
No, I love the song. I think it's pretty cheeky and almost tacky, but I love the beat.
It's very danceable.
I know, it's probably the reason why we're in trouble today. It's the music.
Well, the Beatles certainly brought Eastern mysticism into the culture in kind of a big way.
They sure did.
And which doesn't directly impact on this, but in a sense, maybe it does, because it sort of paved the way to think something other than a Judeo-Christian worldview.
Oh, yeah. The country was ready for that back then, wasn't it? I mean, the United States.
Well, it was certainly being made ready for that. It's interesting, when I first asked Irina to kind of weigh in on this with us, I had already started reading Rod Dreher's book. Mm-hmm. Christopher Green asks, I wonder if the Beatles ever went to the USSR.
Not back in the 60s. They went to India, but
and they met the gurus, and
they went to Comiskey Park in Chicago, but I don't think they ever went to.
When I contacted her, I was reading Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, and I asked if she would read it as well, because I wanted to talk to them about the things kind of from an up close and personal perspective. And as we were talking about that, I sort of asked her the question, do you know much about your history? I mean, you grew up in the USSR, and she asked me a sort of interesting question that I hadn't thought about immediately. Are you talking about the USSR or Russia, the Soviet Union or Russia? Because Russia is a country, the USSR or the Soviet Union is a country, and all of the ones that they collected.
Yeah, Kazakhstan,
the system, yes, the regime,
yeah. And I said, well, actually, I was thinking of Russia and all of the countries that collected the system, the USSR. It didn't dawn on me about Russia being separate, although it is.
Mm-hmm.
So they tried to go with before. It's now the Russian Federation. Is that what it's called?
Yes, it is.
And then briefly, between the USSR and that, they had something else at the CIP or something like that. I forget.
CCCP.
I was told by my friend Gennady Sergenko, it's SSSR.
SSSR, yes. Yeah. Союз Советских Социалистических Республик. Go ahead and say it.
I
have friends who can do it.
10 times real fast, yes. But in any case, Gennady Sergenko came to. I was working at Northern Seminary. This was before we knew each other, right, Don?
Yes.
And the Berlin Wall had fallen, and the USSR still existed, but things, glasnost, everything was opening up, And we had a visit from a Baptist church choir, singing group. They came to a chapel at the seminary, and they sang for us in English and in Russian. What really impressed me was that this is a group of young Soviets, Russians, singing Christian songs, and they kind of sway back and forth as they say. And I thought, they do that in Russia? It's like, I didn't know that I thought it was going to be all, they're going to get down and the legs are going to come out, and all that. But no, they didn't do it that way. But then I was informed by a registrar that he had been to Moscow at least once already, and he had gotten the group over. And he said, we have a student coming from there. His name is Gennady Sergenko. And when he came over, I remember meeting him. His English was okay. My friend, our registrar took him to the local food store. And after he saw what was on the shelves, he went back to his dorm room and locked himself in for several days and did not come out. He could not believe he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And the thing is, his wife and 2 children were back in Moscow, and they weren't going to eat like that, until they finally came over. So I was asked, Gennady doesn't have a car. Would you mind driving him around different places, especially on weekends? So I was driving him one day, and it was really interesting. I learned quite a bit. I mean, there's this road, an east-west road in the suburbs that as you're coming across this hill, you can see the Chicago skyline. On a clear day, it's beautiful. You can see all the tall buildings. And I had Gennady in the car, and I was driving. I said, Gennady, I cannot tell you, this is 1991, I can't tell you how many times I crossed over this bridge and imagined a mushroom cloud from a nuclear bomb going off over the city. And he looked at me and said, really? he just couldn't you think we would do that to you? And I said, well, not you personally.
Thanks.
But anyways, he was very, he asked me a lot of questions. Like, we were driving down side street, and it was a beautiful summer day. And he says, Ron, why are the streets empty? Why is there no one outside playing, walking? And I said, well, they're inside running their air conditioners and watching their television sets. I guess in Moscow, people come out and walk. Back then, it's been 30 years almost. So anyways, it was really interesting. It was quite an education.
So that's going to lead into what I want to start asking Irina. And I want to set it up with this. We have talked in the past, Ron and I, about Americans' lack of knowledge about history. For most, I say, history started about 18 minutes ago. I mean, they have no real grasp of history. It is also true, I would suggest, that most Americans have no grasp of what goes on, first, outside of their town, perhaps. Maybe they don't go very far geographically. Second, outside of their state. Maybe they don't travel as much out of the state. Third, outside of the country. More Americans don't go out of the country than do. And so they have no concept of what it might have been like, for example, to live in the USSR at that point in time, or in communist or totalitarian societies in general. Otherwise, I don't think we would find so many today arguing that we should be involved in making this a totalitarian nation. So with that perspective, you came here, like Ron's friend did, from the former Soviet Union. Give us kind of your impression on when you first arrived in the United States. What sort of cultural thoughts did you have?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll start with John Grisham's quote that I came across. I was reviewing some of his novels. I love John Grisham. And The Last Juror, there's a point at which there were letters written about protesting against war and for war. And this one lady, I can't remember her name, Mrs. Ferguson, I believe this is a character. And she's accusing the protagonist of being a communist and all sorts of things. And he says, Mrs. So-and-so, she would not know a communist or a tyrant or backslider because the place she lives protects her from such. So if she met one, she would know one. And so when I came first from the Soviet Union, it was actually Russia at that point, Russian Federation. I came here to the United States in 1996. And yes, I witnessed both the Soviet Union and its collapse. And I went back several times, once to Russia, once to a former Soviet republic. And to my shock, as recently as 3 years ago, I still saw a lot of it there. I still saw a lot of the remnant of the ghost of the Soviet Union. And that was a little bit frightening to me at first because my husband actually, he's like, oh, I did not expect to see that.
What kind of things are we talking about?
Military presence right there at the airport. They separated me and my husband. They were dressed the same uniforms as when I left 20 years prior. So that was kind of an interesting segue to that. But coming to the United States of America, let me put it this way, I kind of get thrown in like a puppy in the cold water here because I had no particular understanding of what America would be like. But I did study English because I knew enough about my culture, about the Soviet Union culture, that I wanted to leave it because it was that bad. And it was particularly bad for being a woman, especially, if you're a young girl growing up, you don't see a lot of potential. And I can go on and on and on into this, and I will touch on the book because I love the book. It was a great book, Live Not by Lies. And it was an excellent, excellent capture of so many stories of people.
We had the impression that the Soviet Union was like a mecca of women's equality. You had a female astronaut long before we did.
Oh yeah, well, Valentina Tereshkova. Yes, I know.
Yes, we thought so.
We all applauded her,
but it wasn't. The opportunities didn't exist for most women in the Soviet Union.
Or men. You had to be basically built and constructed to be someone to be competitive in the world, not within your own culture. If you didn't have talent, it's too bad. Just stay there.
But that's what they accuse capitalism of being. That's what the socialists here say. Capitalism is all about competition and dog eat dog and things like that.
Well, that's another concept of them. Like Don was saying, that there's a lack of understanding of the culture today. I don't necessarily know. I can't tell you because I wasn't here before, let's say 30, 40, 50 years ago. I have a feeling there was a better understanding of a personal culture within the personal space, within maybe the state even, or a community. And people perhaps didn't mind not knowing simply because there was that overall reverence and respect for other people to begin with. So if they didn't know, they're like, oh, tell us about your culture. And it would be, I kind of expect it to be friendlier, but here's the thing. United States of America is pretty big. Just size-wise, and it's pretty grand. And my husband and I recently took several trips across the country prior to COVID, and then we had to go and visit some relatives, and I was just shocked how huge it is. And we're talking about almost a week, and I got to see the both coasts, and what you see is both coasts really do have their own ideology as opposed to the rest of the country.
Right.
And so when I landed in one of the coastal states, and within probably the first, I would say, couple of months, I was a little bit shocked at first, and I thought, well, maybe I'm seeing things wrong. But I began to detect socialist presence even in 1996, and I thought, this is really odd.
Have you ever heard of the People's Cube website?
No.
It's created by a graphic artist who also immigrated here from the former Soviet Union. He used to be part of the teams, whatever, that created the Soviet propaganda pictures. So he's very good at the artwork that was used in propaganda posters. He's very good. He's a very good artist. And he thought, well, where do I go? Where's the best place to go to ply my trade in the United States? He went to New York. And this is as communism is falling. It's really all discredited. But except in New York, he over at home, people were laughing at Karl Marx even harder than we laughed at Groucho Marx. They were laughing at the socialist dogmas and doctrines. They didn't work. And now he comes over to New York to work, and he finds everybody here takes it really seriously. Everybody here thinks socialism is a good thing and will work. And he's like, I can't believe it. So he came up with this website. Have you heard of Rubik's Cube? Mm-hmm. Well, the People's Cube is like the Rubik's Cube, except every square is red on all sides. So everybody always wins. And so that's the premise. That's why he came up with the name Rubik's Cube. He's got a picture of Karl Marx holding this thing that looks like a Rubik's Cube, except it is all red. So it's the People's Cube because nobody loses. And he has got
everybody loses.
Everybody.
which is kind of interesting because you were remarking that you didn't see that you had much opportunity. So is it the case that under a totalitarian society like that, you are not elevating everybody to their maximum potential? You are lowering everybody to the lowest common denominator for governmental reasons. Would that be accurate?
Kind of like a rubber band effect, yes. Everybody's pulled down, but not quite the same as what I've been seeing in the American public education system. That's kind of done in a way to, well, we'll go into this a little bit later when we're talking about certain issues like social justice. However, in the Soviet Union, it was really more of phenomenon for the West, for the rest of the world, that we don't have any bad students, and anybody who's truant is just complete anomaly, and we'll deal with them. Kind of like back to that, the female astronaut, or even the first astronaut in space was Yuri Gagarin, or Gagarin as we say, and everybody thinks, wow, they really excel. I'm very proud in so many ways of a lot of the people who've accomplished things that they did, because they worked. I mean, they were really almost like heroes, because they really dedicated themselves to the cause, to be the best for the people, not necessarily for the country. But then they were rewarded by taking challenges. And usually that would end up being like, well, a death sentence. For instance, Gagarin died, I think it was 2 years later, because they put him on an experimental plane, saying, well, since you've flown in outer space, now you can go ahead and take this one, and basically a missile. So that's how the Soviet regime dealt with. This is almost like saying, you get the privilege of dying for your society, and get a medal on the wall someplace. So in many ways, you had to basically dedicate yourself and say goodbye to your family and your normal life. The Olympic Games is a good example.
Oh, wow. Every year it was us versus you guys.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you about the mushroom cloud that you see, we're in the same position, because we had to put on those gas masks. Oh my goodness. We had the drills. We had to hide under the tables. And every time I'm thinking,
by the time I came along, did you hide under tables, Don? Did you do the stop the we didn't have, it was, I remember watching old black and white movies about it, but they weren't doing it anymore. We had some kind of drills, but nothing like what they showed, because I think by the time the 60s rolled around, people realized nobody's going to survive. There's
That's
really
what
no
I
way.
was thinking too. What are we hiding under the table for? It's going to be a nuclear winter. I asked my brother. I used to look up to my brother, who's 5 years older, and I said, "So what's going to happen if a nuclear bomb explodes?" Well, there will be a permanent snow and permanent winter. I'm like, how do we survive? Well, we don't.
Well, and many of us,
okay.
Many of us wouldn't have survived the initial blast anyway.
No, and then the propaganda would continue that they would do these funny, cartoonish Star Wars and saying, this is what Ronald Reagan's doing right now, and we're shooting down their rockets out in space. I mean, they really did that.
They said they were shooting down our rockets?
I remember seeing stuff like this on TV going, this is going on right now. And we're like, the great Soviet Union's protecting us. I mean, I believed for it for probably a minute.
Wow.
Okay.
It didn't take me long to figure it out.
Right. We seem to be moving more and more toward at least a soft totalitarianism, which Dreher does deal with. We had toyed with playing a short video of a pastor from Poland in Canada who had the police come in to try to break up a church meeting, and he threw them out, calling them Nazis, and told them not to come back without a warrant. And then about last week, I believe it was, a SWAT team showed up while he was driving, he and his brother, and a SWAT team arrested him. So I guess Canada is serious about making sure Christians don't meet.
somehow that made sense to somebody to do it that way.
Yeah. He was charged with inciting people to gather in church. So that's a pretty.
And for an average person from the Soviet bloc, Canada and the United States were kind of looked at it as one. So to us, it was. At this point, I've been here long enough to know the difference, but it would be very disturbing to see that happening in Canada, because without understanding the strict difference in laws, and I've studied criminal justice in the United States. I have not studied in Canada, but I've visited Canada, and there's that immediate feel of socialism there. Right. I mean, they'll stop the cars, they'll pull people over for no reason. That's what
Right.
they did in the Soviet
And
Union.
I was always taught or led to believe that Canada is like this kinder, gentler nation where everything is,
Yeah,
all the
it
people are
appeared to be
polite.
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
it,
So,
that was
so,
my impression at
so
first.
picking
Yes.
up on something Irina said earlier is she has this feeling that 40 or 50 years ago, Americans had a better sense of sort of personal responsibility, of kindness and acceptance toward others that are not like themselves, for example, perhaps are interested in their culture, were more respectful of others than our culture tends to be today. I think largely our culture has been educated out of that, in part by our media. Someone pointed out that our media today, like the New York Times, is not a whole lot different than Pravda. Was it Pravda?
Yeah.
Truth.
Truth. Exactly. Probably.
Yeah. Now, Rod Dreher makes this interesting statement on page 126 of his book. Memory. He talks about how to
Cultural memory. And,
cultural memory.
yeah, I love the chapter.
Yeah, memory, historical and otherwise, is a weapon of cultural self-defense. I like that.
Mhm.
History is not just what is written in textbooks. History is the stories we tell ourselves about who we who we are. History is embedded in the language we use, the things we make, the rituals we observe. History is culture, and so is Christianity. Now, you didn't grow up being a Christian, but you say that resonates with you.
Which part of Christianity?
This statement.
Oh, yes.
Why?
Well, one of my professors used to say that why is a very loaded question.
I know.
I'll try to answer it.
It's undefined, but you'll define it for me.
Well, my father was basically a communist, and one of my grandmothers was a Russian Orthodox. And so there was a constant struggle. Of course, she didn't win in that because she was silenced constantly. But her fear of God really provided all of us grandkids, there were 8 of us, a sense that there was something greater to seek. So there was a sense of God. And I remember asking, again, back to my brother, he was this exemplary guy. He really was a really great person. He passed away. He had a tragic accident. That's why I'm speaking of him in the past. But I always looked up to him, and he really was a good big brother. And I said, is there a God? He goes, no. I said, how do we know? He goes, well, cosmonauts went out to space and they didn't see anybody. And my husband always jokes. He goes, yeah, because they looked at the other side. So I think I've already made that joke before. But that was a very quick, abrupt answer. Likewise, answers I got from, my father wouldn't even speak of God or religion. And now that we're talking about decades removed, I begin to understand his struggle. And the book describes it, and that is for the sake of the children. Some people had to embrace this. I'm trying to remember the word. I think it's called Getmen. It's something where you adapt a lie and you live that lie, and to the point where you become embedded in it, that you become convoluted, and basically it pathologizes your lifestyle. So you begin to almost believe it. So he didn't necessarily, I don't think my father actually truly believed in communism, because I don't think almost anybody does when you actually live in that regime. But the society gave him no choice. He worked at a prison system.
Was he a member of the party?
Yes, he was basically almost a second or third to the superintendent of a prison.
So he was one of a very small percentage of people who actually belonged to the party.
Yes, yes, and that's why my understanding of communism is super heightened, because he would come home from work exhausted because he had worked 48 hours a shift from a maximum security prison where now what I understand, probably political prisoners were held. And it was pretty bad. It was pretty ruthless. So even during my time growing up, I got to understand things that other people didn't. So the gulag continued.
Wow.
So it's pretty
Well,
frightening.
we do have some in this country who are concerned about why we're not seeing more of this coming into the country.
We need more. We need to have more.
You need more information about it?
No,
Awareness,
we
or
need more socialism, they say.
we need more socialism. Yeah, Ron, take it away, if you will.
Okay, well, there was recently an emergency meeting at the Toxico Corporation, and the project lead, Stu, said these protests are delaying the project and killing our bottom line. All this over a few million dead fish, said Foreman Larry. Yeah, we're the real victims here, said PR spokesperson Pam. Across town, the hedge fund manager consults with his lawyer. I feel so left out of the culture wars. I can't afford to be left behind. But where do I find the right victim status to bring me the professional success I'm looking for? Meanwhile, Phil is meeting with his career counselor. I've come to the point that I realize I don't have enough intersectionality on my resume. Do you think I should consider gender reassignment surgery to boost my job prospects? Now there's a solution for all these problems. The grievance industrial complex. At the grievance industrial complex, you'll get the premier manufacturer and recycler of fine grievance products. They provide grievances customized for your political, economic, and social goals, and they work closely with you throughout the design and implementation process to ensure your satisfaction. And all grievance industrial complex products come with their patented moral high ground, which gives you victim status, identity politics tactics, flawless far left ideology, and so much more. And for a limited time, free, you get Playing the Victim Card for Terrorists. It's the #1 guide to making fools of the Western mainstream media, says Certified Terrorist must have a beer now. Even better than the Harry Potter series, says Dr. S.J.W. Jones. The grievance industrial complex, because things are never bad enough already. You need to check them out. So, Marxism was different in the Soviet Union, though, than it is here, because the brand of Marxism we have has been filtered through a few decades of what's become known as cultural Marxism.
Cultural Marxism.
Where it's about grievances now. They came to the conclusion, it was a guy named Antonio Gramsci who came to the conclusion back in the 40s that Western Europe should have fallen to communism. The industrialized West should have fallen to communism before the agrarian eastern part of Europe. What explained that? Well, they didn't have a good explanation, but they figured we've got to find out some way to make these people think they're oppressed, because they really don't think they're oppressed enough to start a revolution.
Right.
So they came up with, instead of just economic class, they added all kinds of other things over the decades, gender, minority status, and all that. And so now everybody has a grievance. And one of the things you find in common with the people who are really, really into this is that some of them are not even aware that they're Marxists. Some of them aren't aware.
Right.
But they want to overthrow capitalism. Capitalism is still the bogeyman. It's still the thing that must be defeated. It's still the root of all evil in their minds.
So where we come, and I kind of want to, for the next half of the program, sort of just turn it over to Irina to let her wax eloquent about her thoughts on these issues. But it occurs to me, or has occurred to me, Joy and I talk a lot about this stuff, that we have become as a culture anti-science instead of pro-science. Here's what I mean by that. They claim that they are pro-science and yet don't know the difference between a male and female. They claim they're pro-science, but they don't seem to know that based on geography, living in the womb versus outside the womb doesn't mean you're not human or that you should have human rights. And so science seems to be a convenient foil that they try to use without actually believing in science. We have become a largely narrative culture, which creates all kinds of problems. But you were reading the book, you resonated with a number of things in it. So tell us about what you think, where you think we're heading, and how Christians specifically can prepare for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the author talks about that psychological well-being has become more important than the physical well-being. That's when he describes that in the book, and even some of the doctors um, having trouble working in their fields because they're now not allowed to explain that certain things are more dangerous for people, even if that's their first Hippocratic oath. So they're holding back, and if they do speak out, then they fear losing their job, losing their societal status. Somewhere in the book, I like the example of a word that was used. I think it was one of the former Polish influencers in the combating socialism thinking, and he says this is the electronic goatscaping, electronic stoning. So what we're starting to see is anybody who doesn't agree with the language now is being basically verbally stoned and also ostracized.
Canceled.
And the cancel culture, and the conformity is as a result of the ideology. To bring it back to Karl Marx, I mean, many things can be said about him, and people who don't understand Karl Marx are the ones who are quoting him to propel their agendas. People who do understand are the ones who are speaking against this ideology, because that's all it was. It was not science. It's a theory. There are a lot of theories out there. Some are good theories, some are bad theories. And his theory came as a result of his observing the situation in early Russia, pre-revolutionary Russia, and he actually is German-born. Yes, he's German-born. So the influence he had on people had to do with his attempt to do away with Christianity, because he saw that Christianity is useless, and therefore he created this pseudo-religion, thinking that no, we can achieve utopia today, and we can achieve this paradise today, because we don't have to go through all the suffering. There were a lot of people who were oppressed. There were a lot of people who were suffering. There are people who are oppressed today and they're suffering. That is not denied. That is clearly a problem around the globe. But he used it in his own way, and maybe he didn't even understand the implications that it carried on. But very few people understood him, and the intelligentsia did, and they thought, well, it's a great idea. Let's go ahead and strive for power here. And a lot of people, St. Petersburg was brutalized during the revolution. I mean, the things that were done to the Winter Palace, and I used to live in St. Petersburg for about 3 years, and it's a gorgeous city. I still love it. But I actually lived also in basically Siberia, actually not far from where the Tsars were taken, the Tsars family executed. They were exiled for a year and then they were executed in that area. So yeah, that's my background. So having to even hear Marxism reemerging is, I don't even know if I even have the right word for it. It's painful. It's kind of like almost a point of cognitive dissonance. It's to the point of just being disillusioned, because is this really what hatred does? Because I think I had to struggle with it as a therapist, I have a psychology background as well, and I had to struggle with this, and it doesn't make any sense. Why would anybody want that? Well, I came to a conclusion. Here's my theory, and again, it's a theory, but I think there's a little bit of proof that I find in this book as well. But the underlying cause of this is, like Solzhenitsyn says, live not by lies, is actually spiritual. The underlying cause of totalitarianism is spiritual warfare, and therefore hatred is instilled in people. And so what happens is, when people are oppressed, they become bitter, they become resentful, they become hateful. Now, it's very difficult to struggle, it's very difficult to suffer. That's not, again, denied, but hatred is not the solution here. So a lot of hatred was instilled into people, and the Red Terror caused millions of people to be murdered. So we're now talking about not just soft totalitarianism that's sneaking into this country, and yes, it's absolutely at the door. I saw it coming in 20 plus years ago, especially when there were some deals made with China, and I thought, wow, what's happening? I was again, I was just blown away. Like, how could this be? Do they know what they're doing? And I started speaking to some of my friends who were in the political realm, and they said, "Oh, no, no, no,
Don't
this will
worry.
never come here. Oh,
No,
no." And I'm
no.
like, it's happening. This is the trajectory.
Yeah.
And I just finally stopped talking about it altogether. I got exhausted. So
Yeah.
I thank the Lord for this book, because there's so many other people and their testimonies that I can kind of say, like, yes, I told you so, but not that I'm trying to rub it in. But to bring it, well, I kind of am rubbing it in, but it's unfortunate because it's our children's generation. It's our future. They'll be doomed if this continues. So
Yeah,
awareness is
I
a
have a
must.
friend. I have a friend who's from Poland, and he is absolutely flabbergasted at what he's seeing. He says
Yeah.
they don't understand. When I was a child, my mother would take me to the market at like 5 a.m. She would wake me up because if she had a young child with her, she would get a sooner place in line and
Mhm.
perhaps get some groceries. If she didn't have me, she almost never was able to get groceries. Is that really what we want in our country?
Well,
Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just
no,
interested.
it's always a good question. Feel free, because I can talk about this for hours, and I don't think we have that. But here's to throw something in, and this is just a little glimpse. Like, if you were to look at the life of the Soviet Union, not in a movie, not staged, but if you just had a glimpse of it, you would see things like, this is ridiculous. Can't believe it. I'm gonna say this, but it's true. Women were asked to leave their baby carriages with the baby outside of the store when they go in. And the
Wow.
dogs.
What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. It's the Soviet Union. There is no crime there.
Right.
Wow.
There's a famous quote by Winston Churchill. It goes like this: the main vice of capitalism is the uneven distribution of prosperity. The main vice of socialism is the even distribution of misery.
Yeah.
And I think what's happened in our country is that over time, people have been forced or I don't know what the right word is. People have been indoctrinated into believing the first half of this, that we have such terrible uneven distribution. Well, yeah, there are people with billions of dollars, but I have more than enough to live off of. So why am I complaining? It's uneven distribution, but do we have food? Do we have clothing? Do we have shelter? And is it not just? It's not even our poor people have television sets and
Right.
and
have far more than
Cell
people living
phones,
in
yeah.
Zimbabwe, for example.
And the second half of Churchill's statement is now totally. It's not even believed by many people. In fact, have you heard of Noam Chomsky?
I have, but I don't know what he said.
Well,
Doesn't come to mind.
he's a pretty old guy now, but he made the statement after communism fell in Europe. He made the statement that the average worker in the Soviet bloc was living in a worker's paradise before the Soviet Union fell, and he it's like, what? I mean, I don't, at the time he made the statement, it was still the 90s. I don't think most sane people didn't believe him, because we saw what it looked like on the grocery store shelves, thanks to Glasnost. And, Gorbachev did open up things so that we could take a look before it all collapsed. Mm-hmm. But today it's 30 years later now, or 25 or 30 years, a 25 to 30-year-old kid, they're all kids to me, he doesn't know anything about that. He doesn't know about the equal distribution of misery, and if I tell him, he probably won't believe it.
Right.
I mean, he probably won't believe
let's go back, because Irina did an interesting turn there. She raised the faith issue when she was telling her story. Mm-hmm. So why is that important in our current situation, and how might that help those of us who do have faith work through and live in spite of what may be the coming, at least soft totalitarianism, if not worse?
Well, once again, back to Karl Marx. Christianity, in his opinion, was the enemy of communism. It's the antithesis. They cannot coexist. So there's the pseudo-religion, and again, the book talks about that. And because when you have God, you have accountability. And a lot of secular thinkers do not believe that God needs to oversee their lives. And that's just something that's not attractive to the commercial market today in the United States. That's also another concept. I kind of like how how the author writes, versus the big brothers, the big business, capital B's, because you don't really need the big brother to hound you down when you have big business appealing to, it's just every kind of sensuality and every kind of useless stuff that people can comfort themselves with. They don't really need to see God anymore because they're filled with this pseudo religion again, and Christianity gets in the way every single time. So this
what do we call big business? Big Jeff for Jeff Bezos, or Big Bill for Bill Gates? I don't know.
Probably, yeah. Changing the sun and all. Yeah, the distribution of wealth concept, it amazed me that people don't see this as a very basic construct. If you have a society that doesn't permit you to grow your income, I mean, that's it. That's ceiling for everybody except for the elites. It never concerns the elites. Yeah. That's somehow the double standard that nobody pays attention to. But when you live in a free market economy, you can be a billionaire and somebody next door to you who for some reason cannot. There's no correlation. So how is somebody not being a billionaire going to complain about somebody who is? There's equal opportunity. Now people will say, well, that's not true. That is, in practice, yes. And I've experienced this myself. I actually had to beat my head against the wall. Just at one point, somebody came to me and said, well, that's because you're a Russian woman. That's why, you get turned down here and there. I'm like, oh, interesting. I spent about 10 years working with refugees from the former Soviet bloc, and I heard a lot of their stories. A lot of them even far more sad than what I've seen or experienced. But that's why they were here. A lot of them were on political and mainly religious asylum. And even several years ago, 10 years ago, they would begin to complain to me saying, I don't understand. We came here for the religious freedom, and why are we being suppressed? So, and that is something I couldn't answer at the time, because I didn't come here on religious asylum. I came here as an adult. I immigrated as an adult.
Now, who were these people that were being religiously oppressed?
They were a lot of folks from Ukraine and from Moldova and some other Eastern Bloc countries. Some persecution going on. There were some Jewish people who were persecuted in the Baltic states, and a lot of them came here with no language, no families. They really did have pretty miserable lives. But one thing they wanted to do was just to go and sing in their church service, and they were told they can't do it. So that was very. I mean, I had, especially older people. They were crying. They were so depressed about it. So it was really heartbreaking for me, because these were my clients, and I love working with people.
Who was telling them? Who was telling them they couldn't do this?
Usually the state, because they had to go through the state. Because in order for them to apply for certain things, they were told to do certain things that were against their religion. And yeah. Some of the states I lived in, again, they were pretty socialist. And I had to petition. I went to the Capitol on behalf of some of these folks. And
let's name names here. What states are we talking about?
Washington State.
Oh no, that's a surprise! I can't possibly believe
I had doors shut in my face all the time in the Capitol.
Yeah,
I was a nuisance to them. Here comes that interpreter again.
And here, it never dawned on them that the irony of you sticking up for freedom, being from one of the lands that they probably idolized once upon a time, never occurred to them, I don't think.
Yeah, well, my biggest obvious problem was they were granted certain access to certain healthcare and stuff, but they were never allowed to communicate to get to that point, and they would forbid us to communicate on their behalf. And I said, how are they ever going to actually call in to make an appointment, or just to it's like the gatekeeper
What was the
concept.
purpose of this? To ration the benefits? Or what?
I think it's discrimination.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that, because I mentioned before we went on, I got a question last night from somebody about Christian persecution complex.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to point out, if you go to Wikipedia, you can look that up, that's been floating around mostly by liberal theologians and liberals, suggesting that we think that there's Christian persecution, but that is just a myth. That really is not. It is because of people that believe in spiritual warfare, God, angels, demons, and a spiritual battle going on. But you're saying, no, there really is persecution of Christians.
Yes, it's probably still isolated.
Yeah.
It's not like a system's established to do so. This is the beauty about the American society, is that, and some people say, oh, there's no American society or culture. Yes, there is, and we're living in it. But America is great in so many ways because there are so many disconnected things that you can't really put it all into one totalitarian system yet.
Decentralized to a certain point.
And that's the whole point about nationalism. My goodness, that would be a bad thing. So
I was trying to explain to a young person yesterday the difference between why things crashed in the Soviet Union. And I said, imagine if our entire economy, everything about our economy in the United States, everything from agriculture to technology to medicine, everything was planned in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if bureaucrats totally control it. How do you think they do? Do you trust them? Do you think they would do a good job? Right away, he'd had enough encounters with the government to know this would be a terrible mess.
Yeah, there's actually, I enjoy this book tremendously, and I wish I even took more quotes, but here's a quote I wrote down. Total submission to the totalitarian regime would mean the politicization of all aspects of life enforced by secret police, prisons, and labor camps. It meant the harsh persecution of religious believers, the crushing of free speech and expression, and the erasure of historical and cultural memory. And this would happen. Why? Because when you have one central system and also disconnected from faith or accountability to a higher being, you should ask yourself a question: what stops that system from doing whatever it desires? Look at China. And there was a really very good descriptive chapter on that.
Haven't we really witnessed that, at least to a small degree, over the past 12 or 18 months, as they're tearing down statues and?
Oh yeah. This is sort of reverse of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union statues were torn down too, as well, during the collapse. And in that case, it was a positive thing, because they were tearing down statues of people like Lenin and Stalin, who murdered. They were responsible for murders of millions of people, political prisoners, women, children, anybody who disagreed with their ideology. Stalin at one point even expressed, like, well, if we don't have enough food to feed people, just kill off a few people. You didn't have to commit a crime. And that's the one thing that I highly urge for the listeners to read this book, Live Not by Lies. And actually the full title is Live Not by Lies, A Manual for Christian Dissidents. Really is a great book. Why? Because I think he's a journalist in addition to doing blogging, and he's an editor, and he's also majored in math. But he's compiled so many examples of so many different people who resonate like a unison on the same topic and the same subject. It's communism, socialism, totalitarianism is dangerous. It's an ideology. It does not work in the perfect. It works in a perfect world, but not in this world. I'm kind of paraphrasing it. My friend used to say, in a perfect world. Well, we don't live in a perfect world.
Right. Irina House points out the current political focus is to control the economy and culture from the top.
Today,
One of Dreher's quotes, this is from page 136, He's quoting Merrick Benda, who says, "Our father told us that there is a difference between a dictatorship and totalitarianism.
Really?
Dictatorship can make life hard for you, but they don't want to devour your soul. Totalitarian
Oh,
regimes are seeking your souls."
yeah.
But
Totalism.
yeah, it was all encompassing, meaning
Yeah.
nothing outside of it. There was another quote that I wanted to read because it really stuck out to me. And this has to do with, and this is really getting into the psychology of things. Talk about psychology, why it is a psychological warfare, which can translate into spiritual warfare for a lot of people too. But the quote here is that people remember only what they are taught to remember today, and the content of their memory changes overnight if needed. So this is, again, out of that one chapter about cultural memory, that cultural memory is being changed and erased. We're seeing this today here,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
like never
Yeah.
before. And it is happening at an enormous speed because, yes, we have internet, we have media that's all on the side of this propaganda.
Yeah.
Again, I can only go back and say there's just a lot of hatred on that side, that they just want to destroy and demolish the traditional family, the traditional church, the traditional values. Like it's a negative connotation.
Right.
And they're
So,
adding
so
that.
as families, and this is what Dreher is advocating, and you were saying, yeah, we need to do that, is the families need to deal with, here's our history, here's our actual history, here's our Christian history, here's our beliefs, read from books and literature, watch films that kind of help us stay acquainted. I really kind of liked the section, Benda's, I think, where they watched the film High Noon. And I strongly identified with the main character, who came back to defend the townspeople, even though they turned their back on him. And the one person that would come to his aid was his wife, while everyone else kind of stayed back. And they that shaped their view of how they ought to live in the culture they were in.
Yeah. There's no question about that. Understanding what the government's role is may have played a bad role in what's happening today, and that is people mistakenly thought that the government is responsible for raising our children. That is not so.
Oh, that's been going on for decades. Hillary Clinton wrote a book about that.
Right. It takes a village idiot. I mean, it takes a village.
It takes a village, yeah.
So, and that's the beauty of a smaller government in a sense, because the government essentially should assure your rights.
Yeah.
Everything else they cannot institute because, yes, cultures are different. America has immigrants from all over the place. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I came to the United States as an adult. I became a U.S. citizen several years later. I studied the language prior, but I could say I was lucky. I had a really great English teacher. Not everybody's lucky. So when people come here without language, I mean, it must be really scary for them. When I came here with my language skills and I was already doing translation, I was like in a cloud for two years, not knowing which way is up, which way is down, but I knew this is a better place to be. And it is in so many ways. My children were born in the United States. They would have never been born in Russia because of complications I had. So the medical care here saved my children's lives.
You know, Ron and I
right decision.
We've talked about this subject from time to time, and one of the things I've brought up, and I'm going to bring up again because it just strikes me as so important.
Is this the 18-minute thing?
No, this is how much our nation has changed, especially in the last 18 months. But
wow,
when I was young, and I was young once, I know that's.
We have to dig back really far in the video archives for that. Back in the 8mm days.
Back in the exactly 8mm days, and before even there was 8 tracks.
8 tracks. Nobody heard of those when you were born.
And Ron is from the Chicago area. We could go to Chicago, and you had neighborhoods. You had the Polish neighborhood, and the Russian neighborhood, and the Chinese neighborhood, and the Hispanic neighborhood, and the Italian neighborhood. And they all had their own little culture, their stores, their restaurants, the things that they did as a culture, their own banks.
Yeah, great food.
And yet there was a uniting factor across all of those neighborhoods. They were American, right?
Yep. I you know, when I would stand up at Wrigley Field as a kid to the Star Spangled Banner, and next to me was an African American man who looked like he could have been a veteran of World War II. Took his hat off. This is back in the days when men still wore hats, some of them, and put it on his heart. And we stood next to each other in the stands at Wrigley Field. I thought, this guy's more patriotic than I am, you know. Yeah. And it's like now, well, you know, they stand and they, you know, if you go to a ball game, you do the pledge, right, or you do the national anthem.
National anthem, yeah.
But I know it's different now. It's not the same. It's well, when I was a teenager, do you remember when they tried to burn a flag in the middle of Wrigley Field?
Yeah, I do.
Rick Monday was in the outfield. He saw two guys come with an American flag. They tried to set it on fire in the middle of center field in Wrigley Field. Rick Monday runs at a full gallop and grabs the flag and saves the flag, and everybody claps, and the police come and take those trespassers away. I don't know if that would happen the same way. I don't know if that would go down the same way today. Not sure.
It might not. And we defended, as Americans, we said, yes, you have a right to be a dissident. Skokie, we understand you have a certain population that's Jewish, but the neo-Nazi party has a right to protest and to march.
And they were defended by Jewish lawyers from the ACLU.
They were defended by Jewish lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that today. So anyway, go ahead.
Rights. The constitutional rights that we have and the legal system we have here, being the adversarial legal system, does permit, it's just, raw situation, does permit for people to express their, I can't say it's even an opinion anymore, it's a belief system.
Ideology.
And ideology. I've had people who tell me why burning the American flag is their right, and I would listen to them and say, well, okay, that's what you're thinking. But I also understand that there's a huge sacrifice goes on both sides. Maybe there was an anomaly that happened, but institutionally, not that it's a good word, and I hate that word because it's being instituted, but the way the system, the American Constitution and Declaration of Independence is set, is that we have to respect. We cannot just step on everybody's ground and say, well, because I want more of this and you should get less of that. This is why we have dialogues.
Right.
And it's been impossible to discuss issues with people today because all they're doing is they're creating straw men and then attack. That's all they're doing, especially the younger people. And I want to make sure that we get to the heart of the book, and that is live not by lies. Yeah. Means like kind of what you're saying to a degree. Maybe, if I see somebody burning the American flag, I can't lash out at him, say, stop doing this. And it's kind of like, well, maybe it's his right or her right. But that's not what I would do. I would maybe write a letter or something and express yourself if that really comes down to it. Because that's what people could do in a civilized society since they're not being actively murdered. Now, it happens when these things happen as well. And that's why there needs to be an understanding that when we live not by lies, it means if we don't tell the truth, we at least do not lie. And Solzhenitsyn emphasizes that if you are fed a lie, like the totalitarian regime was a lie upon lie, and some people still understood it was a lie, and it almost comes to a point of a sacrifice. You have to make a decision, it's your soul or it's the safety and security, pseudo-safety and security of the culture. And I know I'm kind of speaking in ambiguous terms right now, but that's the essence of the book. If you're a Christian and if you believe in the Word of God, there are certain things that are happening today we simply cannot agree with.
Right.
And even in the name of social justice, because the social justice has been taken out of context.
Right.
It's not that there isn't a call for it. There is a call, but it's not the same as what is being portrayed today. It's that changing of the language, changing of the narrative.
Right.
And anybody who disagrees,
social justice is not biblical justice.
It's
And so it's an invented, or it's
Yeah.
changing of the language. That's really, really good.
I mean, Jesus did it. He basically illustrated a very simple concept of people living by a golden rule. That's even for non-believers. You treat others like you would want to be done unto you. And there's certainly none of that in Soviet Union or in communist China.
And there's less of it here today than there was 18 months ago.
There's no reciprocity.
Right.
When you're up against a government entity that has no God in it, there's no reciprocity of love. There's no compassion. There's no need for the government to save people's lives.
Right.
People need to think about it because it's very, very dangerous ideologically.
We used to have a radio host around here who would say, Marxism is for the people, not for the Marxist.
What?
Marxism is for the people, not for the Marxists.
Yeah,
the
right.
Marxists do quite well because they have control of everything.
Well, they're the elite.
People are the ones who
yes.
suffer, right?
Well, yeah, as I understand things in the Soviet days, if you were a member of the Communist Party, you got to shop at stores that no one
Or you
else.
can go abroad, and as long as you come back. And that's why some people never did, because the moment they did, they requested asylum.
Yeah.
So,
all right, and with that, we're going to have to wrap it up for today. Irina, I am so glad you're with us, and I'd like you to hold on even for a minute or two after Ron. Let's try a waltz today. After Ron waltzes us out of here.
You want me to waltz you out? Okay.
Yeah, how about a waltz? Yeah,
1, 2, 3. All right, here we go.
And a 1 and a 2.
It's going to happen. I predict it. Our resident cult leader profiler is Kneel before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hypervisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and Deopposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never prove that in a court of law.
Never happened.
So don't even try.
No, don't try.
Don't try. So
Joy loves Emergency Manicure Productions, by the way.
Yeah, I have an emergency right now. It's like, yeah, okay.
All right. So to all of you folks out there, see you next